Hello everyone, in this episode I'm going to talk about how you can deploy your Blazor WebAssembly application using GitHub Actions on Azure for free. Before I get started with deploying, let's first understand the project architecture of the demo application that I'm going to deploy on Azure. Of course, I'm going to use BlazingChat because that's the project that we have been working on. So the architecture of BlazingChat is the client is a Blazor WebAssembly application because I want to use most of the resources on the client side. If I want to update UI, I don't want to trouble my server. I don't want to make requests to my server just to update UI, right? I want to use all the resources on the client side and use Blazor WebAssembly application. But if I want to get data from the server, I could use ASP.NET Core Web API. I can use HTTP client that Blazor has because .NET Runtime is running in the browser. I could use HTTP client from here and make requests to ASP.NET Core Web API and get the data for my UI. I can also connect to my server using Signal R connection because in this application, we're using chat feature too. So of course, we're gonna need Signal R connection too. So you can do that too. Now, the idea is that I'm gonna deploy my client application on Azure Static Web App, which is free. And it also gives you an SSL certificate, so you don't really have to buy an SSL certificate. It also gives you an option to map your custom domain to Azure Static Web App so that you don't have to use the link which Azure gives you. That way you can, configure your whole application for free without paying for SSL certificate or for configuring your custom domains too. When it comes to WebAPI, I'm going to deploy that on Azure App Services of free tier. And if you have more traffic, then you can use other tiers too. You can scale up your Azure App Service. It's pretty easy to scale up going from free tier to the most expensive tier with most resources. That's pretty easy to handle that. So that shouldn't be a problem. But for this time, I'm going to use free because BlazingChat is not used by a whole lot of people. Now, I've already deployed BlazingChat on Azure using this architecture, and I had to follow these 7 steps. And I'm going to go through all these 7 steps one by one so that I could help you in deploying your applications too. But before I go through these steps, let's first see how blazingchat.com looks, and then we'll jump into these steps and I'll show you how you can set up your whole process so that when you push your changes to your GitHub, and GitHub will trigger the actions to deploy your changes to production. You don't have to manually do anything. So let's first see how blazingchat.com looks. I'm going to go to blazingchat.com. This is not localhost. I'm going to click on login. I'm going to log in with John Smith. John Smith does not have a whole lot of roles, so I can't really, save or update anything. But you can see that I'm connecting to the database and I'm logging into the application using HTTP client, and even authentication authorization is working fine. Let's log in with someone who has more access. So I'm going to log in with Curious Drive here. I'm going to log in with my Curious Drive account here. Now, Curious Drive Gmail account has full access. It has the admin access. So you can see I have the save button now. It does get saved. It can also pull up accounts, contacts so that I can talk to them. I can also update the settings. So that could be done too. Let's try to talk to someone. I want to talk to Fahad Mullaji. Let me try and log in into my Chrome here. I'm going to go to blazingchat.com and I'm going to log in with Fahad Mullaji, which is my Twitter account. And then I'm going to go to contacts and let's select Curious Drive. I'm going to say, hello, Curious Drive. And you can see that I'm receiving this message from Fahad Mullaji. I'm going to say, hello back to you, hit enter. and then that message gets received to Fahad Milaji. So you can see that even Signal R is working on BlazingChat.com. Let's jump into these steps and see how I have deployed these changes into Azure. So the first thing that you need to do, you need to set up a CI/CD for your client. For that, you need to have your project on GitHub. So I already have my project set up on GitHub. If you go to the source folder, you have this client and WebAPI project. These are the main projects that I have. And these talk to each other in order to perform database operations and in order to render UI for the client. So let's first set up CI/CD for client, and then we'll set up CI/CD for our web API too. For that, I'm going to go to my Azure portal here. And here I'm going to first go to my resource group. So whenever you create a new project, you should create a resource group for that. You should, so that it's easier to get rid of the project if it's not configured right. That's what I do for all of my project. And you can see that I've created a resource group for BlazingChat.com too. So I've created BlazingChat resource group. You can create resource group by clicking on this create. It'll ask you the subscription and just the name, and you can select a region where you want to create, and that will get created there. So I've already created BlazingChat resource group. If I go to BlazingChat resource group here, it'll list down all the resources that I have for my resource group here. There are some app service plans. I have app insights too, but the important thing that I want you to look at is these static web app and this app service. This static web app is hosting my client, and this app service is hosting my web API. So let's first create static web app, and then I'll show you how you can map that to your GitHub client project and set up CI/CD. For that, I'm going to click on create here. And here I'm going to select web app and web static app actually. I'm going to select web static app. And you can see the static web app gets populated here. And you can select subscription here and click on create. Once you click on create, then it's going to load up the subscription and the resource group that you're in. You can give a name to your static web app. You can give whatever your name of your project is. I'm going to give BlazingChat WASM. It's going to throw an error because I already have BlazingChat WASM, but I'm going to give one so that I don't get the error. Plant type, this is a hobby project, so I've selected free and hobby personal project. But if you want to put something in production, you can select standard. It doesn't really have to be a hobby. And then I'm going to select the region as Central USA, whatever is closest to you, you can select that. And then it's asking the deployment details, where you want to get the source code from. It's asking me to connect to my GitHub account. So I'm going to sign into my GitHub. In the window in my next monitor here, it's going to populate to authorize Azure Web Apps to connect to my GitHub. I already did that on my different window here. I don't want to show my authentication details. And then you can select organization if you have. I'm going to select QS Drive, and then it's going to load up all the repositories that I have on my GitHub account. I have this BlazingChat repository that I want to deploy, so I'm going to select that. And then you can select the branch that you would like to deploy. I have this issue branch, issue 31 branch, and then main branch. You can select any branch that you like, but most of the people do main branch. So I'm going to select main branch for this. And then it's going to ask you the build details. You can select a particular framework. You can have Angular, React, Vue if you want to, but we have Blazor application. Of course, I'm going to select Blazor here. And then it's going to fill up app location, API location, and output location for me. But these are something that you need to configure correctly. My client is in source/client project. So make sure that you're giving proper path here. So I'm going to give source client here. And the API location is for Azure functions. It's not web API. So I'm going to keep this empty. I don't need to have that. And then I'm going to click on review and create, and it's going to ask me if all the details are correct or not. And then you can click on create. Once you click on create, then it's going to create the static app, of course, but it's also going to create a workflow file for you on GitHub. So if I go to my BlazingChat here in this github.github folder, it's going to create a workflow file for you. So I'm going to click on this workflow folder, and it's going to create Azure Static Web Apps, Greywater. It'll give you a random name, and you can see that it's getting the client project from a proper location, and it's going to trigger a release whenever you push anything on the main branch. So every time you commit and push something on the main branch, this action will get triggered. It actually gets triggered as soon as you map your Azure Static Web App to your GitHub client project. It will start an action. It hasn't started that because I did not create, but once you create that, it will start up that release. This is Azure Static Web App CI/CD. It will start that and it'll push your client to this location. So if I go to my BlazingChat Web API, not Web API, sorry. If I go to my BlazingChat WASM, it's going to put that into Greywater something Azure Static Web App.net in this location. And the best thing is you can map this link to your custom domains. I'll talk about that in a minute. But yeah, that could be mapped to your custom domains too. So that will get triggered and it'll push all the changes. We are also going to check how you can do that continuously. We'll push a sample code change into our actions, and we'll see if they get triggered or not later on in this video. So the CI/CD process for client is set up. Let's set up CI/CD process for WebAPI. For that, I'm going to go to my Azure again and resource group. I've already created this BlazingChat Web API. So you'll have to create BlazingChat app service. So I'm going to create an app service here. And it sometimes shows web API, web app. Yeah, this web app. So you're going to select that, and then I'm going to click on create. Here, you're going to select the subscription, of course, and the resource group. Here, I'm going to give the web app name as BlazingChat Web API. It's going to throw an error because it already has that. I'm going to select one. And then here, I'm going to select the runtime stack to .NET 5. And then you can select the location and Windows Plan Central. I'm going to select Windows because it was working for Windows, not for Linux. It had some issues with SQLite, so I'm going to select Windows. And then Windows does have free tier, so free F1 tier is something that I'm going to select, which has 1 GB of RAM, which is not a lot, but it is enough for BlazingChat. If you want to scale that up, you can, of course, do that. And I'm going to click on review and create, and it will create the web API. It's not going to set up the CI/CD for you. It's just going to create a web API, a resource in BlazingChat resource group. It's going to just create this, which will give you a link, which will look like this. And it will say that you need to deploy something on this. I've already deployed my BlazingChat web API on this, and that's the reason why I'm not going there yet. But if you want to set up CI/CD for this, then you can use Visual Studio for this. You don't need Visual Studio Professional. You can use Visual Studio Community version. It's free. You can just Google Visual Studio Community and you can download it. And then I'm going to open up my BlazingChat solution here and right click on my web API project and go to publish. And here it will show me the profiles that are already there, which I can use to push my changes. But you can also set up your own profiles too. That's what I'm going to try and do here. So here, if you look at it, this is the Azure Static Web App Greywater. This is for our client and this is for our server. So the way I created this is by clicking on this new. It'll give you a pop-up, which will select Azure here. And once I click on next, you're going to select Windows because that's what we have selected. I'm going to select Windows, and it's going to load the web application, the web app service that you've created. Of course, you do need to be logged into your Visual Studio in order to pull that information from Azure. So make sure that you're logged in here. I'm logged in as Curious Drive in my Visual Studio, and you can select your app service that you've created. This BlazingChat web API is something that you've created. So I'm going to select that, and I'm not going to select any API management. I'm going to click on next. And here I'm going to select the CI/CD using GitHub Actions workflow. And then if I click on finish, then it's going to create a workflow file, just like it created for the client. It will create that workflow file in local. You'll have to push that file. Once you click on finish, it's going to ask you to push that file, commit and push that file to production so that it could trigger that action and deploy your changes onto your server. Once you push that, then it will kick in an action here. It will say that, okay, you're configuring your CI/CD here, and that will get kicked in. So let's go ahead and push a sample change and see how these actions are getting triggered. For that, I'm going to open my VS Code, and we already have nav menus, right? So if I go to my BlazingChat, I have this profile, contacts, settings. I'm going to add another nav menu, which is going to be profile 2, just for fun, just for checking if my CI/CD is working or not. And this is our weather forecast controller, which is returning 5 random weathers. So instead of returning 5, I'm going to return 10 and see if that gets pushed into our server. So the first change is going to be nav menu item, right? So I'm going to go to my shared folder here, open my nav menu, and copy this profile and just name it as profile 2, just for testing. And I'm gonna go to my WebAPI project here. In weather forecast, instead of returning 5, I'm gonna return 10. I'll return that, and it will show me 3 changes. This is because of I was setting up the CI/CD for BlazingChat web API. We don't need this. I'm gonna delete this file. So we have 2 changes. One is in nav menu. We added a menu item here, and in weather forecast we changed from 5 to 10. We want 10 random weather forecast. So I'm gonna put a comment saying that CI/CD testing, and then commit this change and push this change. As soon as I push this change on my main branch, because that's what I configured on my GitHub workflow, it will kick in action. So I'm going to go to my actions here, and you can see that it kicked in an action, CI/CD testing, the commit message that we added. It kicked in that. Let's check all the workflows. If I click on all the workflows, you can see that it did trigger that for my BlazingChat web API and for my Azure static web app too. So it's going to push both of these changes on client project and on the server project. So this takes around 4 to 5 minutes. I'm going to pause the video here and I'll come back when it's done running. So now you can see that it has given these green tick marks. This took 4 minutes 18 seconds, and this took 2 minutes and 40 seconds. This is Azure Static Web App, and this is BlazingChat Web API. You can even go to the details. You can click on the CI/CD. You can open the build process and see what exactly it did. It does restore, build, test, publish, deploy, just normal steps to deploy your application. You can do the same thing with Azure Static Web Apps too. You can open that and see the steps that it took in order to deploy your changes to your client. Now let's go ahead and see if the changes actually got deployed or not. For that, I'm gonna go to this link again, and this was returning 5 random weather forecasts, right? So I'm gonna refresh this and see if it returns 10 now. So this is going to connect to our new changes, and it's going to try and get the weather. And now you can see that it returned from 0 to 9, it returned 10 weather forecast. If I am going to my blazingchat.com here, I don't have profile to nav menu. I'm going to refresh and expect that it's going to go to my new changes and it's going to get the latest bits and show profile 2 here, because that's the UI change that we made on the client side that also got published on my application on the Azure. So this is how you can set up CI/CD. There are some other configuration changes that I had to make in order to make everything work right. Let's go through them and then we'll end this video. So the first thing that I want to talk about is app settings.json. This is important because your client needs to know where it needs to connect to when it's in development region and it's in production region. So I had to add a app settings.json file and app settings.development.json file. So if I open development, then I have this base address, which is localhost 6001, which is the localhost address of my web API. But if I open app settings.json, then I have this BlazingChat web API Azure websites, which is the production link. So this is what it's going to use when it's in production, and this is what it's going to use when it's in development. And same thing that I had to do for Signal R2. This is the Signal R client. Let's talk about the static web app and custom domains first. Hang on. If you refresh your page here, you can see that it doesn't show a 404 error. You might get this if you haven't added this file. The file that I'm talking about is this static web app config.json. So if you go to your client project, then I have added this static web app.config. My application needs to know where it has to fall back when someone refreshes the browser, because this is just a storage account. It doesn't know where to go. So it needs that navigation fallback. So you need to add this page so that even if you refresh your application, it will go to correct link and it will show the page that you were in. And also you can set up a custom domain on your client. So like I mentioned in my Blazor WASM resource, if I open my BlazingChat WASM resource in Azure and go to configuration, no, actually custom domains, then you can see that I have mapped blazingchat.com. It's the domain that I bought. And you can also map your custom domains here. You can add a custom domain here and that gets mapped to. You'll have to validate, you'll have to add something on your domain provider in order to validate the two connections. But once you do that, it is ready to use. And also this second change, Signal R settings. So if I go back to my app settings here, if I go to my app settings, which are in www root. So one has the 6001, which is the local address side, and this is the production address. So I had to inject configuration in my chat.razor component. So in my chat.razor component, I had to inject iConfiguration. And then whenever I'm setting my hub connection, so if you're using Signal R for your project, then this is something that you'll have to do. If you are in development, it's going to get the base address of development, which is 6001. But if you're in production, it will get the production address, which is this. So that's something that I had to do for my Signal R connections too. The next thing that I want to talk about is on the web API side. So I had to enable cross-origin resource sharing on the web API side, because my web API needs to know where the requests are coming from. I can't just take requests from any client, right? So that's something that I had to configure on the server side. So if you go to my web API and open my startup.cs here I added course as a service. And here I told my web API that if the requests are coming from localhost 5001, which is our BlazingChat client, localhost BlazingChat client, then it's fine. Or if the requests are coming from blazingchat.com, which is our Azure static web app, those requests are from okay too. But if the requests are coming from any other place, then that's not okay. We are going to restrict. We are not going to return any response if the requests are coming from any other clients. So that's something that I had to do, and also had to do some database settings on WebAPI on Azure side. So if I go to my BlazingChat Web API, and in configuration, I had to add a database connection string here. This is where you can configure all your app insights and everything. So this is where you can see this BlazingChat connection string. If I show the data source here, which is BlazingChat DB, this is a SQLite connection. And if I go to my app settings here, we have this same connection string. That's something that I had to add to make the database connection. But once you do that, then it makes the database connection, and then you can perform database operations still. If your database file doesn't get pushed, if you're using SQLite connection, and if your database file doesn't get connected, you can connect to FTP server and copy paste your file manually if that doesn't work. But most of the time it does. If that does not work, that's something that you can do to make it work. So that's all about how you can deploy your Blazor application on Azure. With this, I'm gonna end this series. This is the last episode of BlazingChat. I'm going to convert this application into a mobile application, which is going to be a Mavi series that I'm gonna start working on in November and December when Mavi is production released. If you have any questions, you can ask those questions in the comment section below. The code is on GitHub. I'm going to provide the link in the video description. Please share this with everyone who needs this information. It really helps me. If you want to reach out to me, you can reach out to me on Twitter or Facebook. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.